I'm Billy S, welcome back to the channel. Today we're taking a look at the dungeons of The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. And I'm gonna say it, this is the strongest set of dungeons in any Zelda game I've played on my replay of the series. None of them feel derivative of each other, they use their dungeon items in spectacular fashion, and many of the locations feel realistic in the world. The Goron Mines are a mining facility, Arbiter's grounds were a ruined prison, City in the Sky is home to an entire race of flying freaks. I just appreciate when dungeons aren't just temples for the sake of being temples, instead having a more grounded reason to exist in the world. I won't be including the Cave of Ordeals or the Cave of Shadows in my ranking, as they're not proper dungeons in the traditional sense, but they would both bottom the list anyway, with Cave of Shadows in 11th because I just don't think Wolf Link is detailed enough to carry an entire dungeon on his back, and Cave of Ordeals in 10th because I enjoy enemy gauntlets, but it's not why I play Zelda games. So, be sure to parry that subscribe button to stay up to date on all my future videos, and let's jump right in. All 9 dungeons in The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, ranked. Let me know your favourite down below. At number 9, we have Hyrule Castle, the final dungeon of the game. Now, despite it being in 9th place, I actually think Hyrule Castle in this game has some really good thematics to it. The castle is empty, devoid of meaningful life, because all of Hyrule's soldiers stationed here have been killed. You can see their spirits throughout your exploration if you turn into Wolf Link, and you can even visit the royal graveyard in the very back of the castle if you find a specific wall you can crawl through. This extra bit of exploration is a nice touch, as you can get a spare regular key, which can be used to access the treasure room right before the final boss door, a handsome reward for being thorough. The outer part of the castle is more interesting to me, as you have to get through Ganondorf's Bulblin army. To the right, you have a boar riding section where you get to smash through all these enemies and blockades before solving a Gale boomerang puzzle, while on the left you have some enemy gauntlets leading to a final rematch against King Bulblin. His fight isn't that different from his appearance in the Gerudo Desert, but I respect that he does a hefty amount of damage, and the reveal that he can speak and is actually an intelligent creature is just one of the best moments in the game. Midna's pure shock after the fight is legendary. Once you enter the castle proper, the dungeon loses me a bit. It's too empty and doesn't feel like a real castle. You have to claw shot up chandeliers and solve some puzzles to get back outside, but I just think about how Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom's Hyrule Castle is both a dungeon and also a place people lived in. With Twilight Princess, the castle's layout feels nonsensical and unrealistic. I also don't like how, because of the castle's scaling, you don't ever see the tower Zelda was trapped in during your prior visits, nor the rooftops you scaled as Wolf Link, and I just wish there was more continuity there. At least we get one last usage out of the spinner, a sorely underused item, and I like the moment where the Resistance comes in to help us get the boss key. They could have appeared more often during their specific questlines, with Shad being the only one to do so as we looked for the City in the Sky, but I think they're still cool for helping us out. Hyrule Castle ends with a great boss fight in the very throne room we saw near the start of the game in Zant's intro cutscene, bringing Twilight Princess into a nice full circle. I just think the other dungeons are all more interesting by design. At number 8, we have the Palace of Twilight, the 8th dungeon in the game. Collecting all the shards of the Mirror of Twilight allows Link and Midna to go to the Twilight Realm, where we have to break into Zant's palace and finish him off for good. I love the aesthetics here, with the Twilight theming in full force. This otherworldly, polygonal design of the palace is eerie, while the subdued colours come across as very cold and alien, which makes for great contrast when you collect the souls at the end of the 2 side palaces, bringing some much needed light back to the Twilight. The main gimmick stems from needing to bring the souls to the main plaza, except you'll be chased the whole time by giant Zant hands. The souls are what the Twilly use to charge their realm, and Zant doesn't want to lose those power sources. So you go through a series of rooms to reach the soul chamber, and then you head back, carrying the soul and using them to activate new platforms and collect chests you couldn't before. The souls also have the power to banish dark fog, which if Link inhales, will immediately turn him into wolf form. It's a nice way of forcing wolf Link usage, while also being a good way of punishing the player for careless positioning. I love the giant Zant heads that appear throughout the dungeon as well. They're a great, nice turret-like obstacle to overcome. The Zant hands are a bit tedious, as I found in this room, I didn't have a lot of time to rescue the orb before the hands reactivated from my attempt at stunning them, leading to a rather annoying 5-minute back and forth between us. The reason the Palace of Twilight ultimately lands down this low, though, comes in the form of the final portion of the dungeon. I just don't think the level design is very good. There are a ton of empty rooms with platforms that lift you up, and sometimes you have to randomly pick one and hope it takes you to the right spot. The boss key is hidden in a fun nook behind a darkness fog waterfall, but that's really the only thing I remember about this portion of the map. Ironically, I prefer the Palace of Twilight in Hyrule Warriors. It's a super interesting map there. Here, as a dungeon, it just never comes together in a way that the devs wanted. And like Hyrule Castle, I wish we could have seen more realistic pathways through the back half of the dungeon so I could get the essence of, oh, some people actually lived here. It's actually very Hollow Bastion from Kingdom Hearts with all the floating platforms, except Hollow Bastion was actually a fortress you could see someone living in. At least Zant's throne room looked like a real place. At number 7, we have the Lakebed Temple, the third dungeon of the game. Remember how I said that I like that Twilight Princess generally has dungeons that fit within the world and aren't just generic temples like in the older games? Lakebed Temple didn't get the memo. It's a place of worship for the Zora that was sealed away because of monsters infesting the complex, and it's up to us to head inside and take care of everything. Now, as far as water temples go, Lakebed isn't as complex as it's made out to be. Once you get through the opening rooms to the central chamber, the dungeon ends up being fairly linear. You need to activate the water in the top right of the dungeon, which allows water to flow into the central chamber, activating a water mill that allows you to progress to the left side of the dungeon. You complete the left side, activate the water mechanism, get the boss key, and bam, the boss door is yours to reach. You have to use a central staircase to change the water flow by claw-shotting switches on the upper levels, which is pretty fun. The challenge for this temple came in the form of figuring out where to go in each individual room though. Turns out gamers just need to look up. This dungeon has a mechanic where you can break rocks hanging from the ceiling, and anytime I found myself stuck, it was just because I missed one of these rocks. This was especially prevalent here, where I was trying to launch bombs up with a geyser, when the solution was just to look up and shoot a bomb arrow. I'm not the biggest fan of the left side of the dungeon either, as I managed to get the boss key out of order. You're supposed to activate the water flow, causing these gears to turn, allowing you to claw shot your way to the boss key room. Somehow though, I managed to do some tricky jumps that got me there early, which, in a temple that is this confusing to a regular player, isn't a good thing. Also, climbing up the water ramps to collect extra chests with the iron boots was painfully slow. I kept trying to climb on the railing for faster movement, but that also made for more chances of me making a mistake and falling all the way down. The Deku Toad mini-boss was fun though, taking a Dodongo-style approach to its fight, where you have to stun him with bombs, then attack his tongue while avoiding the babies. It was cute, and the claw shot being the dungeon item made for some really fun movement. It's one of the best items in the game for a reason. If you know where you're going, Lakebed is much simpler than people make it out to be, but I can see why people got confused in this dungeon, leading to that traditional water temple syndrome. Awesome boss arena though, really activating that fear of deep water. At number 6, we have the Forest Temple, the first dungeon of the game. And contrary to its name, the Forest Temple isn't just a place of worship. It's the home of the various monkeys that live in Farron Woods. So when you enter your first dungeon, it's to liberate their home and slay the evil that lurks within. The main gimmick revolves around exploring the temple to find all the caged monkeys, and it's a fairly linear sense of progression. You'll explore the lower half of the temple first, then the upper half second, and you'll almost always find your way to the monkey rooms as you need to save specific amounts of them to actually progress. The monkeys will allow Link to swing across large gaps in the temple, starting with small gaps in the central room, before widening to vast bridges that allow you to reach the dungeon's mini-boss. I actually love that Ook the monkey uses the Gale Boomerang to initially stop you from reaching his arena, forcing you to explore that lower portion of the dungeon. There are flowers you need to bomb to open up new paths, there are enemy gauntlet rooms that require you to kill a series of enemies. I love the tile worms who hide underneath loose tiling, and your goal is to walk around them so you don't trigger their attacks, only to then get your revenge later with the Gale Boomerang as you can target their tiles and launch them into the air. I could have done with less Skulltulas, won't lie. The slightly hyper-realistic spiders, plus the way you get a close-up on them when Link does a finishing blow attack, really made my arachnophobia squirm. That one room where you have to drop through a hole to find a monkey had a couple of these spiders that just made me want to stop playing for a little while. The mini-boss against Ook is fun. You have to roll into the pillars he's standing on to knock him over and smack his ass, and the Gale Boomerang is a great reward for the early game. Not only is it a boomerang, but it has the power of wind, allowing you to activate fans and launch certain enemies into the air. Twilight Princess is good at enhancing staple power-ups in the series, and because of the tornado you summon when you throw the boomerang, you can even launch bomb flowers and bomblings at targets of your choice, shown in this room where you have to blow up these rocks out of reach, a mechanic that then sees use again in the dungeon's boss fight against Diababa. I do find it interesting how early you can collect the big key in this dungeon. It's in the lower half, so you grab it by solving a Gale Boomerang puzzle before progressing to the upper portion of the map, which makes saving the monkeys themselves feel like the dungeon's real big key. It's a fun gimmick and a nice change of pace that sets a great tone for Twilight Princess's dungeons moving forwards. At number 5, we have the Goron Mines, the second dungeon of the game, and arguably one of the more underrated dungeons in the franchise. I've gone on record in the past stating that fire levels don't really do it for me in video games. They're often enjoyable experiences, but they don't leave a lasting impression on me. Goron Mines manages to subvert this trope though by melding a traditional fire dungeon with the steampunk machinery of their mining operation. Because we have traditional fire rooms, like the opening corridor that you have to traverse, activating time switches to turn off flamethrowers, but then you also have rooms filled with water that you can use the iron boots to sink into to solve puzzles. You have a large outdoor room in the back of the dungeon where you're running across wooden scaffolding while bokoblins try to snipe you with arrows. You run into various Goron elders holed up in their mining bedrooms who each give you a key shard that forms the boss key, and that bit of interaction goes a long way. You can tell this is an active mine, and you could imagine how the Gorons would be mining here. The aesthetic is very reminiscent of Metroid Prime. There's a vast central area in Magmoor Caverns in that game that reminds me so much of the central rooms in Goron Mines with the magnetic cranes. Of course, the main draw of this temple, as alluded to just then, are the magnet platforms. If you wear your iron boots, you'll often be drawn towards magnetic rocks on the walls and ceiling, allowing you to quite literally walk along said walls and ceilings of various caverns. While the iron boots are slow, and some people understandably don't vibe with the pace, I don't mind this, as you get the chance to take in that you're walking where you shouldn't be. I love when you have to jump from a platform, then wear the iron boots so you get pulled by a magnetic force and go spinning towards a nearby wall like a Beyblade. It's the same with the cranes. They act as a traversal tool, lifting you up from one spot and carrying you across gaps to further away areas. It's so simple, but works insanely well, coming to a head in the mini-boss room where you face a Goron guard and must use the iron boots to remain on the shaking arena. You get to catch the Goron and throw him into the lava, similar to how you fought the Gorons on your way up Death Mountain. It's just one of the coolest arenas in the game and one of the more fun mini-bosses. This kind of blows the dungeon boss out of the water, actually. I think we can all agree on that. You also get the bow and arrows here, a staple Zelda item that allows you to defeat Beemos statues that were peppered throughout the dungeon, as well as getting revenge on all those bokoblins in the aforementioned wooden scaffolding room. And I love that the final room before the boss corridor even has a whole swarm of regular enemies for you to fight, making you feel like a beast as you cut through them all. It's not the best dungeon in Twilight Princess, but it's the clear standout for me among the early game dungeons and deserves more recognition. Although, how about we get rid of that one chest you can't get on a first visit? It's a Meevee stamp. Re-release this on the Switch too and cut it, for the love of God. I hate revisiting dungeons. I want them to be one and done experiences, and this is the only dungeon where you're required to go back to it in the game if you want to get 100% completion, so that's a knock against it. At number 4, we have the Temple of Time, the 6th dungeon of the game. Found within the Sacred Grove, it can only be accessed upon revisiting the location in Link's human form, and returning the Master Sword to its pedestal for a brief moment. A doorway then opens up, allowing Link to return to the past, where the Temple of Time still stood. And immediately we get passed by Uku and her child, which is the funniest visual in this game bar none. The dungeon itself is perhaps the most linear the game has to offer, with you needing to climb to the very top of the Temple of Time to collect a statue needed to open a door in the entrance hall, progressing through each floor by solving various switch puzzles and fighting enemies along the way. We're introduced to Armos Knights here, ancient relics that can only be damaged by dodging around to their backs and slicing their weak spots, ending up as one of the toughest enemy types in the game for me. We have to cut through tiny Goma hatchlings, kill a few regular-sized Gomas, and solve a series of puzzles involving small statues, the main one being the set of scales near the top of the dungeon. For some reason I just really sucked at chucking the statues between the sets of scales, leading to me looking around for an alternate solution that did not exist. Your ascent ends with you facing the most iconic variant of the Darknut enemy in the series, as you have to fight these guys by stunning and hacking away at their armor, and once all of it falls off, they fling their weapon at you and draw a short sword, adopting a faster moveset. Every Darknut in Twilight Princess feels like overcoming a hell of an obstacle, and this intimidating introduction was perfect. Your reward is the Dominion Rod, allowing you to control the various statues found within the dungeon, including this statue that you need to escort all the way back to the entrance. This dungeon ends up being inherently linear because you're tasked with progressing to the top and then backtracking with your new pal while figuring out how to get him across the various rooms that you've already gone through, all on top of collecting extra chests on the descent, including a well-hidden boss key behind a spinner track. I especially loved how in the room with the scales you had to find a ton of extra statues to balance out the weight of the main statue, taking a puzzle you've solved and expanding upon it in an interesting way. Honestly, this dungeon is what Tower of Gods in Wind Waker wishes it could be. It's the same gimmicks, it's the same mini-boss, it's just done better here. Really solid game design, and coming after some fairly non-linear dungeons, it feels like a nice breath of fresh air during Twilight Princess's mid-game. The various traps on each floor remind me of Sen's Fortress in Dark Souls, and this is enhanced with that final corridor to the boss hall being a full-on trap fest. Swinging axes, bladers, rolled spike logs, Beemos statues, they wanted you dead, all leading to a fairly solid boss fight against Armagoma in the deepest room of the temple. I never thought the Temple of Time could be a true dungeon, but Twilight Princess proved us wrong. At number 3, we have the City in the Sky, the 7th dungeon of the game. Just unlocking this hidden place took a whole questline to complete, involving bird statues, a hidden village, and unlocking Ilya's memories. Also, we can blast a cannon up to a floating city, and it was worth the wait. City in the Sky follows the same pathing as the Lakebed Temple, as you have to go to the right side first, clear it out, then go to the left side, clear it out, and then head back to the central area to progress. The difference is that the city in the sky is far more vertical in its level design, while also being a tad more linear where it needs to be. I'll admit, I'm never a fan of when the dungeon's boss is revealed in the opening moments, as I always love that surprise when you discover who you're fighting at the end of each dungeon. But Argarok appearing to terrorize the Uka, then again to destroy the bridge leading to the left side of the city, makes a lot of sense. This is an active menace, and thus it gives you a goal to strive for as you explore. The right side of the city is all about traversing rooms filled with wind turbines, using your claw shot to reach vines and pillars, while avoiding blue flooring that collapses when stepped on. I love the room where you need to use the Uka like cuckoos to ride along wind geysers to progress. It's just a funny setup, because these are sentient creatures who are minding their own business and you just yoink them into the air. The room leading down to the double claw shot is fun as well, as you have to carefully traverse it with a single claw shot your first time through, and then after the Eralfos mini-boss, you retraverse it with a second claw shot that makes progression so much more satisfying. The left side of the city, meanwhile, is all about platforming challenges with the double claw shot. You have a massive maze-like room where you claw shot between walls, floors, and ceilings looking for the next path to progression, with tons of hidden chests to find. Then you have the rooftop P-Hat ruin segment where you have to ride the P-Hats through holes in the walls, and you can even find some well-hidden Poes up here if you're careful. Then you claw shot to the center of the city where you make your way through the central tower to reach the boss key. It's a really intuitive way to progress, with one sole exception. Throughout the dungeon, you find these switches you need to claw shot, then iron boot to weigh them down. There's one switch though after the boss key in the central room of the dungeon that most players will miss their first time through because it never gets any focus while you're exploring, and it's required to activate the fan leading to the boss door tower. Luckily, you can use a broken pillar in the central room to get high enough to hit the switch if you miss it the first time, but I almost didn't see this and was getting ready to go all the way back through the left side of the dungeon to do a loop. It's just a moment where some extra signposting from the developers would have been very welcome. At least the final double claw shot room was fun enough with the rotating fans that I forgot about my little end of dungeon gripe, and I can only praise Argarok as a boss fight when you reach the boss arena at the city's end. It's a dungeon that does so much right, with the only issues being how slow it can sometimes feel at specific points, and how it's not entirely clear what you have to do once you obtain the boss key. At number 2, we have the Arbiter's Grounds, the 4th dungeon of the game. It was a close fought race between my top 2, with them having a clear leg up over the rest of the dungeons, but on this recent replay, Arbiter's Grounds just barely got edged out. Let's start with the obvious. Arbiter's Grounds is one of the darkest dungeons in the series, being a literal prison filled with the ghosts of executed prisoners and a ton of Stalfos knights and other creatures. This is further enhanced when post-dungeon, we see that the room with the Mirror of Twilight was used as an execution platform, which makes the Arbiter's Grounds feel that much darker, how much blood was spilled here. In the present day, it's a ruin filled with quicksand, where if you're not fast enough, you'll be sucked into the depths. With this being the first dungeon you face after unlocking the ability to shift between human and wolf link, I love that they actually took advantage of this by having the first half of the dungeon focus on wolf link's ability to follow scents. We get a redux of the 4 Poes gimmick from Ocarina of Time's Forest Temple, as we have to chase 4 Poes to relight the torches in the main room so we can progress. With this being just the first half of the dungeon, it doesn't actually take that long to find all 4 of them, especially as you can use Link's senses to follow scent trails to find them. This one that has you claw shot up a hole in the ceiling had me a little stumped. It took me far too long to get. I love the rooms where you needed to pull a chain to lift up chandeliers, which you then had to run beneath before they came crashing down, only for a future room to have you need to stand beneath a chandelier so it would fall around you, allowing you to climb on top of it to reach the next door. Smart stuff. We're also introduced to spectral rats in Arbiter's Grounds, which are just horrifying. They cling to Wolf Link, slowing him down. It doesn't hurt the player as far as I can tell, but if they get you in a bad room, oh, you're screwed. Oh, and Re-Dead Knights make an appearance. If you have the Mortal Draw ability, you can actually kill them immediately. Otherwise, you've got the classic gameplay loop of get stunned, panic, dodge right before an attack hits, fight back, get stunned again, rinse and repeat. Just don't be like me and get frozen in quicksand. Once the pose are done, you have to descend into the depths of the ruins via a hand-controlled elevator, leading through a few fun puzzle rooms until you reach the mini-boss Death Hand. Starting as a chained-up sword, you release it and then have to fight a ghost that is possessing said sword. I love this fight. You're able to make it corporeal, revealing that it's a prowling magus-inspired design that is both harrowing and cool to fight. You have to shoot him with arrows to stun him before wailing on him until he's defeated. Not that complex. And for your reward, you get the best item in the game, the spinner. It's also the most underutilized item in the game, and that's partly why Arbiter's Grounds gets knocked in this list. Because instead of giving us a second half of the dungeon to enjoy the spinner, they give us a singular giant room to play around with, almost like a Tony Hawk's Pro Skater level, which is fine. I really like using the spinner to get out of this room, but we could have gotten multiple rooms with more advanced puzzles that made use of the item. Instead, we immediately get access to the room leading to the boss, which does use the spinner in a slightly fun way, just not enough for me to think this was a perfect dungeon. Star-Lord uses the spinner insanely well, so I guess the developers thought that was enough spinner content. They were wrong. You can never have enough spinner content. How was there not a spinner-based minigame in the overworld that involved doing tricks or collecting items or completing custom courses? I think the condensed nature of the spinner's utility harms the dungeon and just makes me wish that the Poe hunting portion were more condensed instead to allow us more time with the spinner, but that's just personal preference. At number 1, we have the Snowpeak Ruins, the 5th dungeon of the game. Found in the valleys of Snowpeak, this ancient mansion is inhabited by a Yeti couple, Yeto and Yetta, with the latter feeling under the weather while the former is trying to help her with a nice homemade soup. Already, I love how to even get to Snowpeak, we have to do a snowboarding section that leaves us feeling jazzed as we enter, and once inside, we have to explore all the different parts of the mansion to find the bedroom key where the mirror shard resides. You can tell this is a place where the Yeti pair live, with a roaring fireplace in the living room and an active kitchen that gives a nice homely feel. Now, you're given access to various parts of the mansion as you progress, starting with the right wing, then the left wing, and then finally upstairs. The main gimmick is that Yetta will tell you what the bedroom key is, except you'll reach the chest to find an Ordon soup ingredient instead. You have to solve some sliding block puzzles, which don't overstay their welcome, thank goodness. You can head out into the courtyard to fight Wolfos in the snow, and as more and more of the mansion unlocks, your ability to backtrack allows you to discover extra goodies. I like this room with the icy rafters where you have to watch where you step lest you slide off into the void below. Or how about once you gain access to the mansion's cannons and you can start using cannonballs to blow up walls and freezards. It's interesting how you have to use special mechanisms to get cannonballs from one room to the next, giving them a real sense of heft, and in the case of a later room, having you make longer journeys to get your ammunition to where it needs to go. The dungeon item is the Ball and Chain, which you obtain after defeating a Ball and Chain trooper, which is a fun mini-boss battle where you claw shot behind him and bait him into attacking so you can get him when he's vulnerable. The Ball and Chain, like the spinner, doesn't get a ton of use in the game, but it has far more immediate usage in its home dungeon, and has the bonus of being able to fuck up a ton of enemies very quickly, and can also destroy bombable walls. Smashing the various frozen enemies is always satisfying, though I will say the Chilphos enemies got very obnoxious in that last chapel room with the boss key sat. You're very vulnerable when using the Ball and Chain as you're stuck in place after tossing the weapon, so any enemy with a projectile can dome you. Figuring out how to progress through the upper floors, including solving a harder variant of the earlier slide puzzle, and using the cannons to destroy hard-to-reach enemies, ultimately felt extremely fulfilling. Snowpeak isn't a particularly large dungeon, yet it's so packed and condensed that it feels bigger than it is, which I just think is a real talent in these games. The only room I disliked was the entrance hall, and even then, it's because of the chandelier ice keys parkour that I kept failing. My curse for wanting to open every single chest. The story of Snowpeak Ruins also allows you to get free soup that, when fully cooked, heals a decent chunk of health, and I've already sung the praises of Yetta's surprise boss fight once you enter the room itself in my last Twilight Princess video. Blizzetta is fantastic, and it's a fight you care about as you know this woman and how the Mirror of Twilight infected her. And the dungeon's history, it's clearly a royal home of some sort, doubling as a fortress with the various cannons installed throughout. It's fun to see somewhere with such a backstory, but repurposed by different residents who bring this location a new meaning. For the Yetis, it really is just their home, and I love that for them. Snowpeak Ruins is the best dungeon in Twilight Princess, and a definite contender for the best Zelda dungeon of all time. You heard it here first, folks. And that's my list. Which Twilight Princess dungeon is your favorite? And am I wrong because I didn't put Arbiter's Grounds at number 1? Let me know down below. And be sure to parry that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all my future videos. Next up, it's Phantom Hourglass. I played it on the Wii U, and I'm excited because it is one of my childhood Zeldas. Doesn't necessarily mean it's a great game, but I'm excited. I want to give a shout out to my YouTube channel members for supporting me for another month. You guys are amazing. It's $4.99. You get a shout out in the description at the end of videos. You get early access to future videos, and you get some special Let's Plays exclusive to you. Right now we're doing a Dark Souls 3 Soul Level 1 run, which only my members can access. So if that piques your interest, be sure to become a channel member. If you want to follow me on social medias, Blue Sky is the way to go. I'm just having a really good time there. It's nice and chill, and it's just fun. So I'll see you guys next time for another video. Adios.